All right, let's wrap up the lecture. Won't take too long because there's not too much to do here. Ultimately, what you really want to understand is that during the late 19th century, it's a period of turmoil and conflict. There's a lot of changes going on as a result of the rapid industrialization um, during the Gilded Age. And we're just kind of focusing right now on what causes that rapid industrialization, what those effects are, how it happens, right? And then also now we're focusing on the worker response. So during especially the 1880s and the early 1890s, you're going to see a period of escalating tension between management and workers. And the Great Railroad Strike of 1877 is just like one example of that. It paralyzes transportation in the nation. It also ultimately ends in a failure for railway workers, although there are some negligible improvements, honestly, to wage cuts. So the other thing that you actually want to understand, and I'll make a mention of this when we look at the sources, I'll record that other video in a few moments, is these dates here, this 1877 date, is connected actually to the Panic of 1873, which is not in and of itself particularly interesting to you, but oftentimes striking workers are striking because there have been cuts to their wages. They're also striking for things like safer working conditions, um, more general respect, stuff like that. But wage cuts are really the primary sort of motivator for strikes. So the 1873 panic actually winds up putting the country into a depression for about 4 years, and this railroad strike is one of those results. The other strikes that you should be aware of, and the Haymarket Riot is not a strike per se, and these are all documented in the AMSCO book, but also obviously the Homestead Strike is what that you watched that video about. But all of these are taking place in not actually in the Northeast. These are taking place more in like the modern day Rust Belt, right? The Haymarket Riot's taking place in Chicago. It is associated with there's pay cuts, but there's also been poor treatment of workers at a local factory, and workers have gone to a rally in Chicago. And many of the workers who are attending this rally are German, which is also another extra layer of fear for management and for the public, because a lot of the people who are involved in these strikes are seen as outsiders, foreigners who are bent on destroying like the American moral fabric. And the Haymarket Riot leads to, there's a bomb. No one knows who drops the bomb or explodes the bomb or whatever. But it does lead to the deaths of several police officers. And the trial that takes place almost immediately after is, for all intents and purposes, even at the time, considered like a sham trial. Men are convicted despite the fact that many of them who are put on trial are only put on trial because their names sound funny. And by funny, I mean foreign. They were just kind of well-known labor activists in the region. And they're also associated with kind of violence and anarchy generally. One man in particular actually has an alibi, a verifiable alibi, not just from one person, but from several people. And nonetheless, he is also convicted. So, but at the time, no one really cares because police officers were killed. But this is like considered like a miscarriage of justice, even at the time, which is kind of saying something. Homestead strike, I don't want to like belabor what happened there, but Frick and Carnegie don't want to have any kind of union activity at any of their factories, and obviously that leads to nothing good for the workers. Men, and we talked about that in class, right? They can't get their jobs back, they're blacklisted. Frick uses a lockout. They kind of use all the tricks in the book. Public opinion turns against the workers when Alexander Berkman attempts to assassinate Frick despite being like 3 feet away from him. I'm not really sure how you can mess that up, but he managed to. And he's like almost martyred, right? And again, this leads to nothing positive for workers. And I think in the video it mentions that you don't see actually any much union activity in the steel industry for another like 40 or so years. Pullman strike is also actually related to the Panic of 1893. There's a lot of like wealth in this period. It's like being amassed in the hands of a few. There's also a lot of economic instability. Like the market is still really unstable, and because there's no central banking system. And so The Panic of 1893 leads railway management. Pullman is like a railroad company. Like, and this is fairly obvious. If you haven't read the Amsco book, like whatever I'm saying right now, I'm not going to help you. I mean, it's not going to hurt you, but it's, you should probably read the book too. But the Pullman strike is about wages being cut, right? But the workers are still dealing with, the same food prices as before. Pullman, the management will not deal with any of the negotiators. There's a strike. Pullman, Eugene Debs, who is the leader of the American Railway Union, is ultimately thrown in jail for his activity in this uprising. That's one of the sources that you looked at. I think you probably have at this point in that packet. It's called In Re Debs from 1895. It's a court injunction basically saying that, like, what Eugene Debs was doing was illegal. And while he's in jail, actually, he becomes increasingly radicalized. So that kind of backfires. Not if you're a socialist, you think it's great. All right, last but not least, my favorite cartoon of all time. Not that I don't even actually think this is on the test, but I love it anyway. It's just so great. I'm going to zoom in a little bit because it's the best. All right, so this is not subtle or nuanced. Make it even bigger. Okay, so on the one hand, you have the industrialists, right? That's Vanderbilt. You can always tell. Are those? Oh, that looks weird. It looks like a little eye. Those are eyeballs. Oh, those are his glasses? I'm not really clear what's happening there. But anyway, that's Vanderbilt. That's Jay Gould. These are all big, captains of industry. And you can see they're using, and you can tell that they're railroad magnates because this is an iron horse, which is a fancy way of saying a railroad. But this is like using medieval imagery again, that they're using this knight, right, to defeat this. I mean, come on, this is so sad. It's so sweet. I feel so bad for this poor. Well, let's talk with this guy about the horse first, okay? So on the horse it says Monopoly. Like, I wonder what that means, right? And then on the plume on his helmet says arrogance. This lance that he's using to attack or intimidate, right, the worker, on it says subsidized press, which is a fancy way of saying, the media response. The media is being used to craft these narratives about workers in which they are dangerous, and not only, they're oftentimes not called dangerous, but they are misled, they're misguided, they don't know any better. And there's other things here: corrupt legislation, corruption in legislature. So this covers all of this is like the quick hits of the criticisms, right? This is one of the few cartoons I've actually seen from the period in which workers this is a very sympathetic point of view for workers. Look at this poor worker. First of all, he's riding a mule who has poverty on his neck. You can tell the mule's not doing well. He's very thirsty. Anytime you see someone shoeless, it's bad news. He has no shoes. You can tell he's a laborer because his hat says labor. Also, his mallet says strike on it, but you can see the strike is really no match for the power and authority and the prestige of the industrialists. My favorite detail in this political cartoon, honestly, it's like such a throwaway thing, but I think it's so poignant, is the fact that his shirt is unbuttoned. Like, oh my God, it kills me. Look at his little unbuttoned shirt. And then obviously they have this massive crowd, right, supporting him, but they are all, it's a little angry, right? But they're all sort of incapable of fighting against this enormous power that is in the hands of a few. And you can tell this is really sympathetic, the point of view, because you see children here without shoes, looking woebegone, right? And it's one of the few cartoons that you see there being a real sense of empathy for the worker, that they are fighting an uphill battle. So I think this does a really good job showing sort of the power differential during the Gilded Age. Strikes are violent and they are disruptive, but because workers don't have the government on their side, right? The government is clearly in league with, or at the very least supportive of, big business. You have the enormous power of big business owners, and you have a lack of public support. That's going to make unions during the late 19th century fairly unsuccessful in achieving their goals, right? You don't see union success really. The first inkling of union success you're going to see during the Progressive Era under Teddy Roosevelt, early 1900s. You're not going to really see the federal government's true embrace of of labor unions until like the 30s during FDR's administration. So that's something to look forward to. All right, I'm going to take a look at those documents in a little bit so we can walk through them. So obviously you looked at them on your own, but I'm going to do a little quick run through of those, but that will be in a second video. Hope this helped.